Welcome everybody. This is, what number is this? This is the fourth session? Yeah. All right, so I want to, some of you with who don't have your photos, which is fine. You don't have to show your photos since you're still in your pajamas or you're at the beach. I'm sort of curious. I kind of think that people in this field have a primary thing they're most interested in above the other ones. And either it's the students and how they change and develop and launch into the world. That's a primary motivator for a lot of folks. The second primary motivator is the community, right? We got to bring about change. And the third is the campus, like higher ed as a whole. We got to get higher ed to be change, how we do curriculum and how we do all this kind of stuff. So I think everybody has a primary. And I'm sort of curious what your guys, if you've thought about it that way at all, and if you have a primary. So with those guys who don't show their faces, you can use that little hand gesture, which I think is under reactions. If your primary motivation interest is the students and how they develop and change and all that kind of stuff, raise your hand. So Emily, Clarence. Okay, all right, so that's kind of 6 of you. If your primary one is the community partners and the change in the community, what would be your, raise your hand. Sam, Val. Okay, that's good. Nobody raised their hand twice. That was, and Elaine. I was very double checking there, so nobody would, oh, Arlette, okay. And those who, it's about higher ed. We got to make higher ed more relevant and more powerful. Interesting. All right, so to me, it's a false choice. So it's a trick question because you can't get the highest student development without them if you believe in experiential learning, without them doing the highest level work in the community. And we can't make the most change in the community through higher ed without students being at a super high level, right? And you can't get either of those unless you get the campus to change. Right? So one of the big debates we've had over all these years is, I mean, big debate, and I'm usually the one arguing, is which should we do first as we share the Bonner model? Should we do the student development part first? And then do community partnerships and then do the infrastructure to make it all work? Or should we start with the community change and then talk about students and their change and then do the infrastructure? We always start with one of those two. We never start with the infrastructure first. And you've got to start somewhere. In that opening session that I helped lead, obviously we try to show this all integrated and we kind of try to make that point. As I go through these slides, as we talk today, I'm going to try to keep making that same point, that as we look at who the partners are and what we can do for them, then we think about what our students are capable of doing or what we need to prepare our students to be able to do. And then in the back of all that, which we don't spend as much time on this set of slides as we should, what's it going to take in terms of the infrastructure on campus to pull this off? And I would argue that running the Bonner program doesn't fully answer the question. It answers it for 40, 60, 80, 100 students, but it doesn't answer it for the rest of the campus. In other words, we can learn how to do this at a really high level with Bonners, both with our partnerships and our student development, and feel really good about that. But unless we take some real serious steps in terms of campus infrastructure, we're not going to be able to get a healthy percentage of the rest of the student body engaged. And you saw by healthy, we're talking about at a deep level, where our goal is 20, 25% of all your graduating seniors are doing something of real seriousness out in the community, which means there needs to be steps to get them there. So the Bonner is the template or a practice run. You learn how to do those things and develop systems and processes and knowledge about how to talk to partners and the kind of content you want to deliver to students and navigating all that kind of stuff over all 4 years. But then how do you make that work on the campus? I would argue actually this whole set of sessions, we're not going to go as deep in any of that campus infrastructure as we should. So whether you're going to do a Bonner program for the new schools or not, try to attend some of the other stuff we're going to do over the course of the fall and look into the other stuff we're doing around academic pathways and, you know, building your center and bringing faculty into the center. So there's sort of more legitimacy, plus their skill sets they're bringing. There's a lot of other pieces here. We'll allude to them, but we don't have time to go into them in the way we'd like to. I also want to tell you that even 30 years in, this is a work in progress. And I think it's the most exciting part of our work. Otherwise, I'd go do something else. But as I said in the opening day, we haven't stayed still. We haven't sort of arrived and sort of settled down and sort of say, here we are. We're pretty impatient. And we feel like we probably do pretty well in those first 2 years of student development in our new trajectory. But as we switch to capacity building projects and higher level social action kind of stuff and more sustained partnerships, different kind of partners, we have a lot of work to go and a lot to learn. So with that sort of introduction, probably took up most of the time that Rachita would allow me to take. I'm going to go, I'm going to tease Rachita a lot because she's much more disciplined than I am about most everything, including how to run a meeting. I'm going to run through some basic stuff right at the front end in terms of what we expect in the Bonner program. I'm going to talk a little bit about the types of partners, the way we frame the world. It's overly simplistic, but at least it gives you some distinctions to work with. I'm going to ask you guys in a breakout to talk about who are most of your partners with. Then we're going to talk a little bit more about the developmental trajectory again, sort of reflect now, think about the partners, how those relate to each other. Give some examples. I have another breakout question. I can't read it on the screen. Let's see. Oh yeah, kind of what are your students currently doing? So in those levels of the student development model, how much did you see happening at the different levels? I'm going to sprint through how to manage the partners. I'm going to emphasize a couple key points, but I don't want to dwell on stuff that you can read and that you already probably do really well anyway. There's some implications of trying to do high level work that I'm going to touch on, but we're going to talk for a second about summer placements. In the Scholar model, the original program, we actually put money in for summer internships. Most Bonner leaders do summer internships tied to service. We haven't actually done a technical survey on that, but as you talk to folks, that seems clear. So just understanding that the summers are really a big opportunity. If given time, I'm going to talk a little bit about social action and what we're doing there. I'm going to end with sort of how do we count this and sort of some ideas around how we share and document and brag about the kind of work our students are doing. But if you look at this, the way we're framing it, there's some other ways of counting things than I think are typically going on campuses.
Robbie, will you share your slides?
I'm going to share my slides, and
okay.
I was heartbroken that my slides last time I didn't share them properly. So I'm going to share them right now. And I'm going to go to yeah. So here we go. All right, there are my slides. So I just told you what we're going to cover. Real simple, 8 to 10 hours a week. Bonner is an intense model. It's that much work over 4 years distinguishes it from most things that are out there. I told you that story in the opening night about Bonner's. I've been sort of going to campuses in the last year or so saying, hey, maybe Bonner's too intense. Maybe it should just be 3 hours a week. And the students just go, no, we can't do that. And I said, why not? And they said, well, we won't get to know the partners. We won't get to make a difference. We can't make a difference to 3 hours a week in the community. And the third one was, which is my favorite in a way, which is we'd be like all those other leadership programs. So what makes Bonner different than most stuff is the intensity of it. That's able to happen because of the financial aid structure. So we meet that opportunity cost. By the way, was this last year's or the year before's new directors meeting? Arlette's right there in the front row.
The year before. Year
before, okay. So what are they doing? We primarily are focused on community-defined needs. Nonprofit or government agencies. It's gotten a little tricky with healthcare because more of that's become privatized, like senior care and stuff like that. So you have to finesse that a little bit. Because we have schools that are across the whole spectrum, for some folks, church through service through their church, Bible study, that kind of stuff, we've had to be clear that that's not really kind of what we're allowing. We also so far have not pushed, we haven't sort of allowed it to be electing somebody to the office. We probably need to change that. but that's another conversation for another day. But now, by the way, in our network, people will vote both sides or all three sides or four sides of an issue. But so it's not so much because of that, but it's more, there's plenty of time for that kind of work, but let's get ourselves immersed in the work. And so as we try to advocate for policies, you're starting in a position of sort of firsthand experience. But we can certainly look at that policy. From a student development standpoint, we want students to grow and develop over those 4 years. And that's fundamental to all this kind of stuff. And we'll talk more about that. The partner side of this equation is one of the first things anybody who's new will do with their school is have to go to their partners and explain what this program looks like. Explain that there's a multi-year intensive developmental process and set of opportunities for students, so that the agencies get excited about giving students more responsibility as they earn it and their skills develop, but that they have the opportunity to grow and develop at the site. This actually is one of the harder challenges as we look at the full developmental model, that partners aren't used to students doing capacity building projects. They aren't used to having consultants essentially working with them. Frankly, the students aren't used to it either. So and neither the staff. So we have this sort of, that's the nut we're trying to crack right now. Part of what's happening there is the agencies begin to rely on the Bonners to run these everyday programs they do, the after school programs, the preschool programs, and the feeding programs. And they can't really, in their minds, afford to have them do something else. So there's a reluctance to have them switch because of that. So that's an ongoing issue for us as well. But this is what we're talking about there. Obviously, reciprocity is key to all of this. The partners, though, once they get started, will fall in love with your Bonners, already have. Your new Bonners come into this thing. The Bonner has this great reputation in the community, on the campus, and everywhere they go. And they're going to want more of them, if anything. The partners view them, they often get teams of students, 2 or 3 students. You come into the site. The partners also, many of them value the opportunity to be a co-educator. They like the idea, to the extent they have time, that they can help develop your students in the ways we talked about.
Remember that honor program I was telling you about?
I saw that you had like some training things on it or something.
All right, so that's sort of the basics of the expectations. Now I want to switch to the types of partners, and this is oversimplified, granted, but you'll see a couple key points here. And if I did this, the play version, I think it would come in one row at a time or one column at a time. But the service provider is our simplistic term for referring to the after school program, the soup kitchen, the place where students are working with individuals, or places. I should put places there. So in places would be if they're doing environmental work, cleaning a park up, or those kinds of things. And we give a couple examples here. The middle category is very broadly defined, which is collaboratives. This is multiple agencies coming together to tackle a problem and looking at the systemic level. So there are coalitions, there are networks, there are alliances. They go by lots of those kinds of names. Here's just 2 examples that are New Jersey based. The Community Food Alliance, which is in New Brunswick, that brings together the soup kitchens, the pantries, the restaurants that are concerned with social good, the community garden folks, the folks doing urban agriculture. There was even an effort around urban beekeeping, the folks at the city level, at the city agency level, some of the funders, and of course, Rutgers, New Brunswick, and I think even Middlesex County College, which is down the road. They're coming together to collaborate and develop strategies for assessing needs, for developing new policies and advocating for those policy changes, for trying to raise money, to document both the need, but also the outcomes that they're achieving, to connect the dots. So Elijah's Promise, one of the main service providers in that group, recognized that beyond just being a soup kitchen, that they had an industrial sized kitchen and they could train their clients in food services and to give them employable skills. So they have a major teaching kitchen built into their efforts. How do you expand that kind of thing? The Alliance to End Homelessness, you may have heard about some of those. very much at a policy level, looking at the systems and the policies and how to integrate those in a more effective way. So there's a whole bunch of these ones. And what's notable about the collaboratives is they themselves, as a collaborative, do not do direct service. They may be, many of their members are service providers, but as a collaborative, that's not their function. Their function is to meet and gather and strategize and organize and raise money, and which will then hopefully change the programs that the service providers are operating, change some of the policies that impact the issues they're working on. But they don't actually do direct service. Then the third category is around campaign. And a campaign is an electoral campaign, elect somebody to mayor or senator or president. It's also a campaign to change a particular policy. When I was in Boston in college, I'm 59, so I don't mind dating myself, but the bottle bill was a big issue. And if there was a little tax on cans and bottles, people would pollute less. And those who did throw it by the wayside, we've all seen folks gather those up and exchange them for the nickel or 4 cents that they get for those things. That took a campaign. That took an effort to mobilize folks, collective action. We use the phrase social action. So now this leaves out a bunch of different kinds of groups. It leaves out think tanks. In a way, it leaves out the mayor, although the mayor is a little bit of the policy stuff, a little bit of the system stuff. They participate in these different groups. So it's not meant to be a comprehensive view, but it is meant to, in a rough way, let us look at how is our effort spent. And in looking at the Bonner network, we get the annual reports and we have a web-based tracking system. When I looked for the word alliance, coalition, network, association, all those sort of buzzwords that would go for a collaborative, this is what I found. 1.5% of our partners are collaboratives. Almost everything we're doing is direct service, hands-on direct service. If we think about how the world's how we're gonna solve all the problems, we know instinctively, and we know experientially, and we know through research and writing and our reading and discussions that we have to also change policies. We also have to change systems. And yet we don't actually give our students much opportunity to do that in our work because we haven't really necessarily built enough of those relationships. The other thing, as you'll see in a second, is the nature of the work with those partners is different. So I'll touch that in a second. So this is just an example of the Community Food Alliance. Brings together a whole bunch of folks, residents, youth, college students, community leaders, local government, and others. And they have a broad mission to ensure all New Brunswick residents have access to nutritious, safe, affordable, and culturally appropriate food at all times. Now, just a quick side thing on collaboratives. We bumped into this thing the other day. And if you work from the right-hand side of this, collective impact, many of you have been reading that phrase or hearing that phrase in the last 3 or 4 years. That's a fairly new label to put on stuff. It came out of these folks at a group called the Foundation Strategy Group. I think they were Boston-based. And they wrote an article in the Stanford Social Innovation Review, probably the best journal to read or magazine to read on nonprofit social action type stuff. So there's a very elaborate model there. The other 3 we saw on a chart. We thought they fit together. And there's a more elaborate follow-up to this, and you can find it on the Bonner Wiki. But groups could come together just to cooperate for an event, let's say. Then they could actually coordinate. One example of coordination is in Trenton, there are 27 food pantries in small Trenton. And some of them just open 1 day a month. There's absolutely no coordination about which day they're open, which day of the month they're open. And you could imagine, we talked to some of the groups there, that if you coordinated it, each ward could have a food pantry open virtually every day of the week for the entire month if they would just coordinate. So people could get to go to multiple places and be able to get support that way. There's some other complexity with that I'm sort of glossing over, but that would be coordination. Collaboration is the one we keep hearing about, actually the label we use. And it's more complicated. It's usually about to do a particular thing where the collective impact is looking more at a holistic system change. So collaboration is often more on programs, let's collaborate to deliver this program. Where collective impact is, let's look at the whole system and try to deal with a whole chain of events, and you get into logic models and all that kind of jazz. But I don't want to dwell too much on that. But just to know that there's the thinking around the collaboration part of this. We still have a lot to learn on that, but this is the just a little language to give you some handles. Okay, so I'm gonna do a breakout here for a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes, and the question is simply, what's the mix of your campus or your programs, community partnerships? And if it's kind of like the rest of the Bonner network, 98.5 to 1.5, what might you do to increase it? Or do you know some groups that you might partner with? So just think a little bit about that, and I'm going to, where's my breakout option here? Oh, there it is. All right, I'm going to do 5 rooms and 5 minutes. See you guys soon. I'm just going to pick it up where we left off. I assume we're all here. Are you all here? Okay. So the goal of this whole first part is, okay, basics Bonner, okay, we got that language. Number 2, you can look at the types of partners. And our whole framework around this work, frankly, the whole thing, we start with who the partners are and work backwards. We don't start with the students and where they are and try to work up. We try to, who are the partners? Who are we working with? What can we do for them productively? What are all the things that we could be good at, should be good at, that they need in a great way? One of the things I'll point out is that collaboratives, if you read the stuff on collective impact, you'll see that they talk about a backbone organization, and that provides the technology if it's a website needed, the background research. They don't lead it, but they provide the convening capacity and a bunch of those kinds of things. Infrastructure. That's what you look at that list and you think about, and go find the articles. Look at that list and you look at what we're doing and you realize, oh, we actually could really do a lot of those things if we could get our act together. So I'm gonna, I'll make that point more as time goes on. All right, so let's talk about student roles. So the first thing is, our work is always 98% of the time. Now sometimes we're actually, students initiate their own program. Campus kitchens is a good example. There's food rescue stuff that my son was involved in that was completely developed by the college students. But if you just think about what the organizations are doing and where their questions come from, in that bottom right-hand, there's the direct service. They're implementing something. There's also where the social action or the advocacy would come from. A lot of the other stuff is research basis. This chart actually comes from my work on community-based research, where there's a bunch of research capacity kind of things we can do. The implementation obviously is more elaborate than we have there. So let me just jump to this one. So here I've already sort of said it. Client service is the kind of the word we use. We're using the term service leadership to be fairly all-encompassing, meaning that's where you could talk about, I coordinate the after-school tutoring program. That's where I'm the senior intern in the Bonner program, helping actually run the Bonner program. There's a bunch of different ways service leadership can happen. So we try to come up with a fairly generic term to convey that. The examples of these are, these are the easy ones. Now we have over the last couple of years asked schools as part of the annual report to give us document count and give us a short description of the service leadership roles and a whole variety of capacity building roles. So these are some of the service leadership roles. Planned and ran after school program twice a week for 2 semesters. Berea Buddies, which is, they run that program. Pretty stuff that you would all recognize. And I'm sure I have many students doing. The capacity building stuff's interesting because it touches all 3 groups. So you can work for an advocacy group, a social action group, working on a campaign, but your work could actually be with the marketing portion, not actually leading the march, but but you could be in a sense in the background of that. But that same work could happen with all three groups, all three types of groups. We developed a more elaborate capacity and opportunities list. We have it on the wiki. We'll show you where that is later, or if you haven't already been there. This just gives you a couple of the, just like the the first page. The difference between this one and the one we had before is there's a lot more options on the left-hand side, a lot more categories, and we didn't have a sentence or two describing the actual opportunity. So it's meant to give a little bit more information. We think that we actually need to go a couple more steps beyond this. And the role model we're using is a group called catchafire.org. If you haven't seen that one, look at it. Literally Catch a Fire, like CATCHAFIRE.org. Really, really good. Go in as if you're an organization and just start flipping through. You'll see exactly what I mean. But some examples, Bonners have done curriculum development for all kinds of organizations, meaning they've developed things for kids that they didn't have before, developed new programs as well. Those are just a couple categories. I was amazed, maybe shouldn't have been amazed, but all kinds of communications and marketing opportunities. There's just an enormously long list. And let me just go back here for a second. We end up in the new version have 7 different categories. Event management. So organizations need to do a fundraiser. They will want your help, students helping organize that. A fundraising itself, marketing communications, that's the one where there's the greatest number of opportunities, at least in our list. Program and curriculum development, research of various kinds, helping with technology, and setting up a volunteer management system, which could be everything from recognition to tracking to communication kind of things. So there's a long list there. You can download it on the wiki. And these are just some other examples: brochures, newsletters, spaghetti dinner, fundraiser, data collection, some of the research opportunities. The last one is social action. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that at the end, provided we have time. And we'll have time if I go quickly. So let me just, if there are any questions on that one, just real briefly. Okay, all good? Great, and I got a couple of chat things. Oh, good. So we're trying to put the link in the chat. Rachita, if you also put the link for that, where that handout is from, just that page.
Yeah, and I had shown them a webinar series, which is on Bonner Learning Community. I'll put that link.
Also there, perfect, okay, great. So let me just remind you about the development progression, but now with the idea of the partners in mind. So we have this progression, and remember that the key here is that Bonners were telling us, this is even just a couple of years ago, that they were moving more rapidly through our earlier model, which didn't have the capacity building type stuff happening until their senior year. They were getting ready, they'd done so much service leadership by the time their sophomore year ended, that if we didn't get them going on the next level, they were kind of they were plateauing. They also felt like some of the more rural or small town communities didn't have the great diversity of organizations that they would like to work with, and that was frustrating to them. So with that in mind and our own ambitions, we sort of modified this to bring that capacity building and social action kind of stuff, to initiate the planning and development for that back down to the junior year. And we actually often refer to it as the junior senior capstone project. For students who aren't Bonners, that may in fact be something that takes place over the summer, just to point out. The transformation goals on the community partner side, you saw this in the opening day, and I'm not going to dwell on it, but the system change, what we don't have here, by the way, is the social action. If you look at the closely, you realize, oh, well, where's the social action stuff? So that's a flaw in this little chart. But also it would make a fifth circle, and then it would be unbalanced with the other circle, and you can only expect so much from me. From the standpoint of the development progression, because we think of them as higher level skills, we do the short-term stuff at the bottom. This is actually based on work my wife was doing in a school garden cooperative here in Princeton, trying to get all the schools to have teachable, edible gardens. They were successful, actually, although I think the high school has done the least maintenance of theirs. But you could imagine students helping plant a garden as part of well, maybe I guess if it's in the fall, They wouldn't be planting the garden at that point. But you can imagine that being a short-term, event. Maybe they're weeding the garden. What a great orientation activity. Then they could be the coach for that garden club. They could go, twice a week when that garden club is meeting at that school, after school. They could then maybe help expand to other places, work in a team. They could have a full-time position in the summer where, frankly, the students aren't often around, although it could be a summer camp. But that could also be developing stuff for the fall. They could then, in the case of the Princeton Garden Cooperative, there's all kinds of stuff they could use workshops for. Not that the students would always lead the workshops, but they could help organize. They had fantastic local chefs come in and do these tasting events, seasonal, with these kids at the elementary school level. And it was just amazing. And one of the feedbacks you get from the parents were, my kid came home and said, how come we don't have any beets? We don't have any beets. I love beets. And the parent, that was like not normal. But helping organize those. They really wanted to make it more part of the curriculum and get some institutional support, school district support for this, so they could do some research on that, survey the attitudes and sort of make a case for that. They could actually do a policy brief and look at other examples in other places as well as what's happening locally. They could then help organize that forum, a public forum to have that discussions, working again, in this case for the School Garden Cooperative. And finally, they could present that to the school board, actually be part of the advocacy process. Now they could do that as a more capacity building focus, or they could get really passionate about it and say, I want to help really make this, and do even more with it. Then that kind of advocacy stuff at the funding level could actually go to the state level too. At the state level in Jersey, they actually, one of the people my wife was working with advocated so successfully, they created a farm to school program at the state level here in New Jersey. So real work like that. So the idea is that not that every Bonner is going to find their service site that first semester or that first year and stay with the same site or the same issue all 4 years. Some will, and that's always a great thing if they do. We also know Bonners are exploring, so they may jump around a little bit. Generally, you want them to settle into something and go deeper on that issue. This is an example of somebody picked this issue and stayed with it all 4 years. You could see where that would be frustrating if they just ended up coordinating the program and they didn't get to see the other components, how the world works and how policy changes and even sort of the impact part of it with the research. So this is a little bit of the question. In a way, it's the flip side of the question I asked a second ago. And I'm not gonna put a breakout on this. I'm gonna save it for the next one. But because I think as I was going in the rooms, you sort of were having this conversation already. Our students mostly work with service providers or we're trying to do this. So if that's okay with you guys, I'm gonna, Richard, is that okay with you? Okay, good. All right. So I'm gonna, there is another question, breakout question. It's I don't know where it is. It's way down there. So I may have to get there real quick. Managing the placements. We have this elaborate, beautifully colored, rainbow colored process. I'm not going to go through all the steps in great detail, as I said, in interest of time, but also it's pretty easy to follow. With Bonner, though, I think the idea that you have, particularly if you're a startup, but I think the experience programs have this too. You have what we've been calling lead partners, the ones where you do most of the work with, the ones that really understand what you're trying to do in terms of the student development and are really committed to working with you on that. They're reliable. They're the ones that you place your freshmen with. So thinking about them, and maybe again, proximity, these are all the obvious kind of things that you might be thinking about already. Most of you, I think, already have these lead partners in mind. It is kind of interesting to think about what are the big issues in your community and do you have folks working with them? I think about half Bonners work on education related programming. We don't have as much in all the other areas combined. Maybe that should change a little bit. Maybe there should be some other areas that we just haven't built those relationships, made the effort to find some new partners. So this might be an opportunity to do that. You also could challenge your Bonners or offer your Bonners the opportunity to do some of that outreach on their own after maybe their first year or second year. Say, look, if there's some partners that you'd like to work with that we don't currently work with, here's our process for doing that. Why don't we have a conversation? And maybe you can initiate that conversation with that partner. So you select them. This part is really big. This is the whole part about orienting the partners. We've got a fair amount of material on the website already, PowerPoints and handouts for introducing the Bonner model to your partners. That's kind of the point of this, because they have not, most of them have had the opportunity to have students in a sustained way, both the intensity hours per week nor over multiple years. So that's having them see that and understand that and buy into that in terms of their role as co-educators and being willing to give the students some additional responsibility is pretty big. You have these forms. Part of the forms, a lot of this is to get to in front of the partners, let them start looking at it and brainstorming with them what might work. In our web-based system, we have to do a job description, service opportunity description. Obviously, we do the orientation. You guys covered a lot of that in the sessions, the last two sessions. The extended orientation is pretty important for Bonner as a best practice. A lot to cover there. You want to get students oriented early. Matching the students is really interesting. It depends. Schools do all different kinds of things. One of our largest programs is at Brown, and they literally they didn't have a building on campus they could do the matchmaking, so they got I think the local high school to open up the gym at night, and they had this whole process where students would go around and interview folks, and they would interview the students, and the students would rank their highest. The partners would keep track of who they were talking to, and so both sides had a voice in selecting who got to work where as their matchmaking. Pretty interesting. Shadowing is another way people do it. So once you have a mature program, bringing students in and having them follow along. The one-time service projects are a great place to get people out there seeing things, but also beginning to think of what might be possible for them. Managing the hours, again, this is we'll cover a little bit of this on Wednesday in terms of the web-based tracking system. But basically, the community learning agreement is a document that we develop drawing from the network, the best practice kind of tools that are out there. And essentially it says, this is what my job is. This is what my learning goals are. These are what my service outcomes I'm hoping they'll be. This is how often I'm going to be there, that kind of thing. And the student signs it. Their site supervisor signs it, and you sign it. Now, it's not for all their hours. It's for their what we call our primary placement. And we think of those as sort of the ones that are going to be most consistently at 4 or 5 hours a week, somewhere in that ballpark, maybe more. But they'll maybe do lots of other service during the semester. But what's the primary one where they can do this process? This is good for reflection purposes. It's also obviously good for management purposes. There's all kinds of stuff we do in terms of tracking hours and doing reflections and stuff like that. We're updating the web-based system. The current one is quite old in terms of the way it operates. It's fine, but it doesn't have a good mobile interface, most notably. If you have another platform, you're welcome to use that. A lot of people are using GivePulse. There's a bunch of Galaxy Digital or something like that. There's a bunch of different examples out there. But we talk about how to enter them and how to enter the accomplishments. We have on the wiki all these guides. So that's why I'm going to cover this. I'm covering this so quickly. And this is something we'll talk more about as time goes on. There's sort of the front end is getting them set up, and the back end of these 6 things, it's sort of managing it on an ongoing basis. I'm actually going to just do an all group conversation for a second. How many of you have a some sort of web-based system for students to track their hours that's not Bonner Weber's? So Emily, what do you guys use?
We actually use something called Mobile Serve. It is an app tracking service. Actually, it's started out of Kentucky and but now is nationwide, and it's actually really user friendly.
Wonderful, wonderful. Who else raised their hand? Alexandra, did you raise your hand? Oh, you're the same place, yeah. Who else has got something? So really, nobody else has. Anybody using? Arlette, what are you guys using?
GivePulse.
GivePulse.
GivePulse for the last 4 years now.
And how's it worked for you?
It works to get reflections, to understand where students are staying, it has not been completely integrated into the back end, which would make it ideal. And that has always hindered its use because
Yeah.
you have to double enter the hours in the school payroll, and that it's a problem. But it's not Giftful's lack of
Yeah.
having the ability to do that. It's mostly institutional.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, if it's work study, tied to work study, double entering anything is a drag. You know, we ask schools to use Bonner Weber's if they don't have something else, because we think it's good practice. We also, even if you're using something else, we want all the Bonners in the system and their enrollment status in the system, because that's how we get communication out to them. That's how we know how many people are in the program, the gender balance, all those kinds of things. So at minimum, Bonner Weber's is a communication platform and an enrollment level tracking kind of thing. It's not necessary. We don't need you to use Bonner Weber's in order to, if you have a better system out there or an alternative system. We chose early on not to be a campus-wide platform because of all the headaches involved with that. So anybody else want to share anything in terms of their, how they do their tracking? How many people, I'm talking about now the new schools, have had to have any tracking system in place of any size? Sierra, is it something that you guys have had to worry about at this point?
Sorry, I went to my room. So we as like a center don't have to have a tracking center, just because usually we have students who come to us who are in maybe like a social work class or who are in other sorts of classes and they just need hours. So their professor and their capstone in general like that will kind of take care of the hours. We just are the, I guess, connecting source.
Got it. Clarence, do you guys have anything like this?
So at Albion, we do not currently have a tracking system. We just got connected with, I believe it's Pulse.
Yeah, Give Pulse, yeah.
Yeah, Give Pulse. We were literally just connected last week, but if I'm being completely honest, I am the tracking system.
Okay.
So every single hour that every fellow works comes through me. And I verify those hours through the site supervisor. So to give you an example, we work with a number of community partners over the summer. And of those community partners, like I give them a schedule for what we call, our students, the fellows. And then I also ask for them to track their attendance. And I go back and make sure that, they were attending the sessions that they were supposed to be at, and if they could not make it for some reason, then we schedule some type of makeup service or makeup session later down the line.
Yeah.
Everything is done with me.
Yeah. Well, for the new schools, there's a lot of schools with a lot of experience, been in Bonner for a long time, and there's occasionally workshops just on this topic, and we'll talk more about this accountability stuff Wednesday afternoon. There'll be a little piece of that, so I don't want to dwell too much more on it now, but let me go back to sharing my screen. So summer placements, like I said, if you look at the hours, well, for the Bonner Scholar Program, they have to do 2 summers. And I remember the debates early on, we found out, that some students were working at a summer camp, and they were doing 18-hour days, and they're 7 days a week. And so they were doing their whole 280 hours in like 3 weeks. We felt like that was really defeating the purpose of, what we're trying to accomplish here. So we said it had to be over at least 7 weeks. And we even got at one point, it had to be sort of 35 hours a week. But the scholar schools have funding for 2 of those summers. The leader schools don't, at least not from us. So it's something that we encourage you to help set up the infrastructure for that, help students find those placements. Increasingly on Bonner Weber's, if we can get it to work, we want Bonner Weber's to have summer students to profile what they did in the summer, rate it, basically like an Amazon rating, and make it searchable across the entire network. And if we have 3,000 Bonners and half of them are doing summer service, in one summer, we'll get 1,500 opportunities for folks in the next summer. And everybody, those sites all know that they were Bonners. Presumably they were really strong Bonners, and there'll be a real excitement around that. So we've got some goals around that. From a developmental standpoint, what you can see about the summers, it's not obvious, is that's a lot of opportunity for a lot of time. I've got a rising junior, and I can't, it mostly falls on deaf ears, but the summers are so critical in terms of students' development that we have to do everything we can to help them find things to do. This past summer, the one I guess we're in it, we challenged the schools to make sure that the students have stuff to do, and that included what we call in-reach. And I'm gonna go look at that screen here in a second, because I think as we enter the fall, many of those in-reach opportunities may still be very relevant for schools that now have to go to remote service in the fall. So I'll touch on that. But this is just meant to convey, even the summers can be developmental as well as they go through. And what's interesting, early on, we saw that the Bonners, the first summer would often go home. You'd almost always go home. One of the goals was to get students to get out of that home community as part of their overall development. And that led to this sophomore exchange and the first year service trip. First year service trip for the scholar program is meant to take students literally out of their region as a group to experience something else. And one of the main motivations was recognition that students weren't leaving, hadn't had that opportunity. If they go in a group, maybe the next summer they'd be more willing to go on their own. So just kind of a sense of what that progression might look like, and sort of some sense of the timeline. We've got good material on this on the wiki, so we won't dwell on this here. There's some forms we have as well to look at, and how the signatures and that kind of stuff work. Any just real quick questions on the summer service? How many of you who aren't, well, like Sam, you've already been in your job, and Val, you have too, and Arlette, how many of you at the other schools are helping students find stuff in the summer? Is that something that's sort of common? So Sierra, what role have you played? Clarence, are you nodding your head too? Okay, I'll go Sierra, and then I'll go to you next.
Well, this year, because of the pandemic, some of the professors have reached out to my supervisor, Leah, and just asked if there was any, needs in the community. And so Leah just made an entire list, kind of reached out to our community partners and put an ask out. And then she just made a list and sent it back to the program coordinator or that faculty member. And then students were able to go in for their hours or their capstone and just kind of pick and choose what they wanted to do.
Yeah. Clarence?
So we actually have a set number of community service partners that we work with throughout the summer yearly. And so, we work with them throughout the year to figure out what their summer service is going to look like. But given what's here, just like the pandemic kind of changed things for us. There was a number of community service partners that we normally work with. We only had a chance to work with one, and then we actually had a new service partner from a neighboring city. Actually, they actually offer a program here in Albion that our students are now working with.
Yeah, interesting. I should add that in the Bonner Scholar Program, the first year we started, it was $3,700 a year per student, chopped up in a couple different categories. It grew to $5,000 a year per student. As it grew, we were able to take some of the additional money and put it into some special categories. One of them was local summer service. Some money to keep students local so that the agencies could have some year-round programming. Students were often interested in doing that. So we just felt like the place-based part of our work is really critical. So we just made sure there were some additional resources there for 2, 3, 4, 5 students to stay local in the summer. And Clarence, I think you were sort of referencing that a little bit as well. Sierra, and yours might have been, what groups do you know in the area that we could work with? And students may be a bigger state university, may live off campus, and that may be an apartment they have year round. So anybody else want to talk about what their summer has looked like? Arlette, is there anything that you want to add?
Yeah, I wanted to add that because Wagner is mostly residential, a lot of our students go home because they don't take summer session. And because we are a summer a Bonner Leaders program, we don't have the funding to support a lot of the students on campus. So what we have done is create an internship of 1 or 2 at most students that do manage to stay on campus, and we provided free housing. This was 2 summers ago. We were unable to do it last summer. And that kind of compensated the cost of staying in New York City, and then we gave them a small stipend as opposed to the hourly rate. But, you know, the good thing is that they were able to find alternative employment during the summer that allowed them to earn some, you know, a living, because it's really hard to stay.
Yeah,
But that was our approach to having some contact, and they would help us prepare orientation. So basically capacity building for the Bonner program.
Yep.
That's how we utilize them.
Yeah, it's a very, very smart thing to do. Yeah, the local summer service often includes your rising senior intern staying around for the summer, helping do all the prep work for the school year. Very, very common and very effective way to help both develop them, but also prepare for the school year. Jennifer, just real, from your experience as a Bonner, how did the summers play? I mean, how did your summer progression go, and how did it play into kind of your growth?
Yeah, so my first summer, it was more of, let's just try something out and see what happens, honestly. I ended up at, I'm blanking on the name right now, but Freedom Schools in Charlotte, North Carolina. And it was an amazing experience in terms of leadership building, in terms of planning, curriculum building. I think it was a really good start in terms of motivating me to look for something more. My second summer, I actually stayed at Guilford and interned with one of the departments. At the time, it was the multicultural education department. And I helped design, plan, organize, and carry out a fundraising event for a nonprofit that's on campus. That was also a lot of fun. And then I think more and more I started to understand what I was looking for. So my third summer, it was more on my own. I did a research internship that was more connected with my major at the time, for physics, research internship at A&T for a whole summer, just learning about a different machine of sorts.
Nice. And actually, I'm glad you raised that. In the Scholar program, there was a push, and we've accepted it. I don't think we've updated the guidelines, and partly the summer blew up, so we didn't have to right away. But basically, we're going to allow students to opt out of one of the 2 summers to do academic research, particularly STEM-related stuff, with a petition of some kind to the staff. So there was a feeling that particularly for underserved groups, the lot more resources now and effort to get them, underrepresented groups into the STEM fields. And there are a lot of motivation of Bonners to be doing that. And I think there was a feeling that the 2 summers was really cutting them out of some of the research opportunities that they really need to develop there. And we felt like they made a very good case. Actually, it was the first student who really made it to me was at a Bonner Congress meeting at Center College. And she was amazingly articulate. And I said, well, write it down. And she was even more articulate in writing. She's from the University of Richmond. The other students weighed in as well. So we will update those guidelines so that there's a more flexibility around that for folks. And I think that's going to be helpful to a bunch of folks in our network, where 10 years ago, that wasn't the case. There wasn't much pushback on that. Emily, just in terms of your summers.
Yeah, I mean, we're also a leader school, so it's been, we are trying to identify places where we can come up with funding to support our students in that way. But right now, we haven't really been able to put our energy in that.
Yeah. No, but I meant your personal ones.
In my purse.
Yeah.
Oh, like when I was about.
Yeah.
Oh, I was like, oh.
I want you to reflect.
Yeah. So
very good. Your professional hat is very solidly on your head.
Yeah, I was
No idea what I was talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I can, well, it's also what, I graduated in 2014, so.
Oh, okay. I forgot you've been out that long.
But I do remember one of my summers of service was kind of in collaboration with the community, the Office of Community Engagement at Center. And so, you know, planning some of those engagement events for Center students. So like our day of service. And I remember that one really well.
Yeah. Well, it's so just that there's obviously there's a selection bias here, but the folks that stay local and want to work in the office, the folks who become senior interns, they're looking at you grown-ups saying they want to be like you, right? And so that local summer service experience in the office, helping run Bonner and into the senior year, well, it's not surprising when you guys become staff on the campuses or staff at the foundation for that matter. So as you think about growing our own, those brand new schools, you will grow your own successors, you'll grow your own young staff in the program, and the summers are really a great place to be doing that. Okay, I'm gonna touch on social action just for a second. Here, in our developmental model, the partnerships, the only thing we had around campaign or social policy stuff was students doing public policy research for community groups. And that's still a very active program. That's the one I have 46 students working with me this summer on, doing policy briefs. And that's a good thing, but that's actually not, that isn't the actual change process. I mean, it's a part of it, it's a step in the process, but it's not actually engaging them in the actual process of trying to change the policies. Social action, which is a broader term than community organizing for us, is that. And I met a faculty member who teaches at San Jose State at some event, and we were talking, and I learned that he's been teaching a class, he's not taught it for more than a dozen years, where students, these are all the weeks, but this is the order of the process. They choose their issue the first week, and by the 5th, 6th, or 7th week, something around there, they actually launch a campaign. So they actually do social action in the class. And since the experiential model, learning model is sort of key to the way we look at the world, this is very different than what you get in most classes that teach about community organizing or about social change. Here they actually do it. Now, in his case, about half the projects are focused on San Jose State University itself and changes in policy. Major campaign they just won, actually over 4 semesters, took them 2 years, was a campaign on student homelessness. 14% of the students in the CSU system in California are homeless or housing insecure at some point during the year. They had a campaign to get the school to do 3 major things. The president resisted, and at the end of the semester, the thing you get evaluated on in part is your campaign book. That campaign book then is what the next group can pick up if they choose to. So students can propose a brand new campaign or pick up a prior one or work for some local advocacy group. And the class has been going on long enough, those groups come and recruit. So this is one where they picked up the campaign book each semester, major press, major high-level strategy and tactics, and very impressive stuff for students who'd never done anything like this coming into the class. Some didn't even quite know what they were signing up to when they started. And it's a fantastic example of what we can do. And I've been working with him, trying to bring his material into our school, into our network, and beyond our network. We're calling it, teaching social action. We didn't do it in August, but we've had we didn't do it July either, but we've had the rest of the time, we've had a monthly webinar with different folks coming in. Here's some of the learning goals. Here's the book he wrote, which is a student guide. So this is the textbook. He was using lots of other people's, but felt like it didn't quite fit the way he taught his course. And we're doing lots of stuff to try to promote this, and you'll find more of it on the wiki. This is much harder to pull off than to pull off the community-based research work we've done with faculty. Because here you're getting faculty, even if they may choose to force all the campaigns to be focused external to the campus. We've talked to some faculty who get around that political problem by doing just that. this is still getting folks way deep into the work in a way that a lot of faculty haven't done themselves, not just the students. And I'd never really done that kind of work in any serious way. So it's uncomfortable. It's the unknown, and it's a challenge. We need it, obviously, if we're going to bring about the big changes we need. And it's a great opportunity for students to learn how to do it and learn by doing it as undergraduates. So we're trying to grow. We have about 100 faculty on this sort of listserv we have now. We're trying to slowly grow this in the Bonner network and beyond. And we're bringing it to the network. So we finally have that final category of partner and activity in our, if you call it, a portfolio of stuff. I'm not optimistic we're going to get hundreds of faculty, but if we can get one per campus and maybe get a second colleague to do something similar, then I think we've got a foothold that we can grow gradually across the network. I would hope that the willingness to go this direction, there's more of that in light of what's been going on this spring and summer, that folks who care about racial justice and are willing to sort of, I'm talking about the administration here, are willing to back their faculty to do stuff that seems more challenging than what they're used to. That they're willing to back the students and support them, even if the student's target is them, some policy the institution has. Now, Scott's classes, the projects, his campaigns have been over the whole map. One of them was to have printers for commuter students accessible in the library, because they had to print the papers and hand it in. That's not a big campaign, but it took a campaign to make it happen. Another one was to get the school to take over and fund a college access program for 3rd and 4th graders who visit campus. These students were running it and felt like this is something that the institution should do, part of the admissions and that whole process, to have the school reach out that way. So it's a very different kind of campaign than the homelessness campaign, which required, it got mayors involved and state legislatures involved and was very high profile. So it can be a whole spectrum. We have more and more material on this, and we're working now on I'm trying to get Scott to do a online version of the course where he has, quote, lectures, the little portion of his classes where he sort of talks about whatever the topic is, can get pre-recorded. And maybe that's a way we could get more people to, I haven't done it before, so I couldn't lead that lecture, but I could actually facilitate the process of students finding their campaigns and coaching them through that campaign. I could probably do that better than I could do the whole thing. And maybe there's other ways that this can work, including with staff leading these as a Bonner workshop series, as a Bonner placement. And then you're sort of getting around some of these other challenges. So we're going to keep pushing this and exploring this. And if it's like everything else we've done, it'll be a slow, very slow ramp up, get the innovators and the early adopters, and then slowly try to work our way up in terms of spreading this around the network. And as in that process, learning more about how to spread it, how to talk about it. So let me finish up with a couple more slides. And if I'm really good, I'll have time to, counting. Okay, so I think this is really important. What do we count right now when we talk about our service? How many people talk about numbers of hours of service that year? Percentage of students that did service at our school? Like, that's actually not a bad thing to count. If you can count that, that's a good thing, right? You should be able to count that. That's why we have these web-based systems. It's one of the reasons you guys create the web or set the web-based systems, because you're trying to get the Carnegie classification, because you're trying to get more resources from the institution. So you have to do that at basis, no question. But beyond that, everybody wants to talk about impact. And I'm going to argue that unless you've got some research dollars that can somehow isolate the relative impact of your students on a group of kids learning how to read or read better, unless you have some money that's going to fund you to do something, you may be able to count pounds of food you donated, but you're not going to be able to count most of the impacts you'd like to count. Nonprofit sector, the social sector has that problem anyway. So this is not unique to us. It's just the nature of it. So I think, though, that we can count the type of things we're doing and suggest a kind of impact around building capacity and engaging in certain kinds of work. And here, I'm just going to give you the quick example. And here I do it in the other order. I don't know why, I just switched the order. So one-time service. You ought to be able to tell the story of how many one-time service projects you had that year, in what issue areas, what you guys did, and how many people are involved. And you even use hours if you wanted to, right? You should be able to do that. Is it easy to do? Not necessarily, because if it's all the fraternities and sororities doing their little projects and they don't have to tell you because they're not required to, then it might be harder to gather some of that data. But client service, we should be able to say, this is how many students went out every week. And you could say that bi-weekly, we mean at least 2 or 3 hours a week. If you had students of 2 different categories, you could say 1 to 3 hours a week and 4 to 7, 4+ hours a week. It'd be kind of interesting to know how many students did that. People have a sense of what that means. And if you said we have this many students doing that, and we had this many or this percentage in after school programs, with this many working with anti-poverty groups, shelters or soup kitchens, you could people would have a sense of the difference between the one time and that kind of stuff. I think it's worth knowing how many students were in a leadership role. I think it's interesting. And it means there's more capacity to make stuff happen because of that. Service internships is a little bit fuzzy for me, but this is where you can work with the Career Services Office and say, how many students that through the Career Services Office or through your office work with a nonprofit or a government agency? In which issue areas? At what level? How many were local? How many were state? How many were national, international? It's kind of, again, a sense of the kind of activity we were doing, counting the categories of engagement, both by issue, but also the role students are playing. I can't tell you, even schools that seem to do a great job counting, they'll tell you how many courses had service attached to them. They don't tell you what happened in those courses in terms of the service. It's maddening. We had 200 courses that were community engaged. And sometimes they even give you a range. Some were project-based and some were more go meet and talk to the partner. They were tours. But it matters, the difference matters, and the nature of the work matters. We're using capacity building, that language. So how many of those happened? How many of those projects happened? One of the things you'll see here is I say 20 partners in 65 students. I actually personally think a lot of the capacity building projects should be team projects. A group of students together working on something, and then their social action stuff. So I think we can articulate this in a more effective way. There's some really cool examples on the wiki to look at, and we're nationally at the foundation. We don't do an annual report. We should. So this is something. If we hadn't had the thing happen, I guess this pandemic, this thing happened, I think this summer we would have gotten our act together to be able to get enough data from the schools to do a foundation annual report, which is totaling all your work. By the way, this slide is meant to say, if we're going to get to that 20-25% of students doing this work, doing the capstone level work, it's going to happen through a whole series of pathways. So Bonner's one. A school year internship program could be another one. A summer program could be a third, right? Now, if they did project-based work in that internship. Departments have capstones. How many are sponsoring community-based capstones? Go find out. A CBR project, the project itself could be capstone level. Now, I say capstone level because we don't personally yet at the Bonner have a definition of what's capstone level and what's lower level. But we're gonna have to figure that out if we're gonna be serious about this. But there could be CBR courses where students are doing capstone level research for a group. And then you have a series of, maybe there's some academic pathways, social justice minor, where that's expected of all those graduates. Food security concentration being different from a minor, a little easier to pull off. And then I've got the project I'm working on, issue briefs, doing policy option research projects. But you could have a fellows program or a consulting core, and that could be another pathway. Initiated with a course in public policy research, maybe in political science department. But this is where I'm beginning to suggest the kind of infrastructure we're going to need to do the depth of partnership work that we all aspire to, which will also at the same time have that high level of student impact that we desire. So this is beginning to suggest the kinds of things that we're going to have to begin to develop. I don't have the word consulting core here, but that's clearly one of the ways we've been framing it. We did do some counts a couple years ago of all the stuff that came in and saw the issue areas where or the types of projects they laid in. Program, I thought research would be the highest, but actually program development training was the highest. Little volunteer management systems, not as many communications at that stage. A lot of fundraising, but the fundraisers were mostly fundraising events, not grant writing. If we had time, I would ask you how you count. I have a couple minutes. How do you count now? And I'm going to pick on your names because Elaine, I'm looking at you. I know you had a big job there. How do you or the offices on campus, maybe not your office, count so far?
So they count with an Excel and pen and paper. But we recently bought Collaboratory, which is a software system. We're still struggling with effective use of it and uploading all of the data. But our goal is to be able to know where the depth in the counting is over just X number of students doing service learning.
I've talked to the Collaboratory folks a number of times. They've come and presented at Bonner meetings. My sense of Collaboratory right now is that they're counting inputs.
Right.
Meaning numbers of courses, types of courses, those kinds of things.
Right.
Not the activity that happened through them, not the community-based activity that happened through them. That's what I said earlier about the school. We have 200 service learning courses.
No, that counting happens through the activity area, through the issue area.
Perfect, great. That's very, very important. So then then you're counting both, that we have the course, but also what the course, the kinds of things the course was engaging students in doing.
Right.
Even if we can't count that the reading level went up, we can talk about that stuff.
Yeah.
Who else can I pick on real quick? Abby, you've been very quiet in that corner of my screen. What do you guys count?
We mostly count hours. We sometimes do like different experiences, so like how many students participate in this mentoring program and how many students with our partnering school are in that. I think one of our ongoing goals for starting last year and going into this year is getting a better understanding of campus-wide how much community engagement we're doing, because we know like faculty lead trips and do things in their classes, but we didn't have a way to track all of that. And so we got engaged through Campus Labs last year and have been testing out the service hours like tracking feature in there. So we're hoping to implement that more across the board this year and see kind of what happens.
Good. What's really common is to have an annual report from a center that highlights 1 or 2 or 3 really cool projects. You never get the chart that goes with it that says, those are 3 of that we're profiling. But we actually had 9. And 3 were this type, and 4 were this type, and 2 more were this type. If you had that and got that around, I think one of the things that would happen is that the faculty and the students who are doing those kinds of things would raise their hands and say, no, you got to include me too. Because one of the hardest parts about this stuff is to get people to bother to give it to you.
Yeah.
Why would I care? It's a pain in the neck. Collaboratory, I got to click all those buttons. I don't know what half those words mean anyway. But I think if you were putting out some really attractive annual report stuff, I'm talking about 4-page things with cool graphics or 8-page, those folded things. And yes, it's a PDF, but you have some print ones lying around. And you got it around all the departments. Say, hey, this is what happened this year. I'm sure stuff has happened in your center. Let us know so we can brag about you too. That'll be one more step in that process. I think we slap it up on a website. We send it into our immediate bosses. It doesn't get enough play. If we gave it more play, I think we would have and we have a language around it, a sort of a way of emphasizing what we're pushing for and our aspirations around the kind of engagement we're trying to make happen on campus. And we're bold about our goal. I think the 20-25% is a bold goal. It's not bold in terms of the percentage of students that want to do that level work. It's not. I've traveled too much. I mean, you guys know this too. I never had a director, coordinator, center say, oh, we don't have that many students on campus that want to do this. We have to get the stuff in place to make all that happen. And as we get that in place, I think we can tell that story, more will want to join. Okay, last couple slides. This is the infrastructure thing. I just want to make this point one more time. And this is a complicated chart. I'm not going to go through it in great detail, but you see we start with the partners. This is our framework. Who the partners are, what our roles are with them. We're emphasizing student roles. Clearly there's a faculty and a staff role that is similar to these roles. Then we get the structures. What's interesting about Bonner is Bonner can cross all of them. As I said before, Bonner can be part of the experiment, part of the learn how to do it across a lot of students. At a place like Albion, where they have an Albion, I forget the name of Clarence, but Build Albion, but they have a Bonner program. They have a program that looks just like Bonner. And that program also could stretch across the whole thing. The clearinghouse, the directory, the web-based thing to find the opportunities, that's pretty common. You need that kind of structure at minimum. With Cool, the group that Wayne started that I helped him with in the mid 80s and went for 20 years, Ariane Hoy was the last executive director. Site-based teams, student-led teams, getting students to do this kind of work was a key component. And you drop down to staffing structures. That was this coalition of all those groups. That was the main thing that Cool was trying to make happen. That and hiring a recent college graduate. This is before many schools didn't have centers. We said at least hire a recent grad. Call them a green dean. That was Wayne's term. Call them a green dean and help them build that coalition of students who are doing this work but haven't been brought in a room together. Then you've got the service learning courses, which predated the stuff we were doing. That whole movement was well underway. We brought in, actually, we highlighted more than anybody else, community-based research. We had $3 million of Learn and Serve funding over 9 years. It was kind of silly that we were the group because we're not, until Ari got her PhD and we hired Rachita, we had no PhDs on staff. But it was a case where little Bonner could do something real focused and make something happen and try to spread it. It's now its own category, which is why it's a form of service learning, but it's its own category in people's mind. And now we're pushing social action courses. The other academic structures we're working on are this these pathways. And one pathway is around the issues or either whether it's broad like social justice or more narrow like food security, or, and then the skill-based certificates or fellowships. We've been using the word consulting core as an alternative way of looking at it. You may cover some of that when you talk about pathways. I think that's the next session. I'm not sure, I can't remember the list of all the sessions, but as I said, we're not going to dwell on, we can't want much time to do this kind of work. When Bonner started, very few of the schools had centers. And now everybody does. Everybody has a center or at least an office to do this kind of work. I have a set of slides with this chart that actually shows the history of the field. It starts at the top left and works its way down to the bottom right. So the client service learning, the Cool Work, Campus Compact, the groups that preceded that were all there. And slowly we're moving to get the stuff farther to the right and farther down. There's more infrastructure, more structures and supports and new kinds of ways of doing this work. As I said before, I think we have a long way to go, but we're making good progress. The question I think Rachita will have posted on the Bonner Learning Community, which I'm going to ask all of you, take 3 minutes and answer this question. It doesn't have to be a fancy answer, but as you've come into looking at Bonner and you look at the way we sort of frame all this collaboration, what might the Bonner program do? Even if you have a well-established program, you're always trying to improve it. How might the Bonner program help you strengthen that? As you look at Bonner, what is it about it? I asked this question earlier about what do you find most compelling about the Bonner model? This is sort of that question, but it's narrower. It's how do you see Bonner help? I'm telling you my argument about what I think Bonner can do to help strengthen your work with partners. I want to remind you that part of the way that's going to work is that you're going to have all these colleagues that have similar ambitions, and they're going to be doing this stuff. And you're going to hear from them regularly in terms of how they're going about trying to answer this question. But this is the question I want. What aspect of campus community collaboration do you hope to expand or strengthen by having a Bonner program? What part of it? And I'll make one other announcement. Vince asked and I've heard this from a few other people, would like to have a sort of a more description of the financial aid part of the Bonner Leader model. This is for prospective schools. So we're gonna squeeze that into the last session, but if it's too short, then I'll just run a follow-up session where we talk about that and any other sort of startup questions that people might have as they get into the new school year and they're looking at potentially bringing this to their campus. So we'll just organize that. People who weren't able to attend this series can always watch them, but we'll do something more like a kind of a free-for-all Q&A, and that'll be one of the first things we cover. I don't want to bore all the other schools with a lot of that if we don't have to, which is why we didn't put it in there. But I think that's one question to follow up. There'll be lots of others. So maybe next week or the week after we can find an hour and just those who are in this thinking about Bonner mode can come together and, you know, do more reflection on what they've been hearing and covering the new ground.
Appreciate it.
Great.
All right, gang, be good. See you Wednesday.
Great. Take care.
Have fun on your day off.
See you. Bye.
Bye.